Authenticity to me is owning your story. It's honoring your origins and all the ups and downs from then until where you're at now, who made you you.
Honoring your origins. Tell me
Hmm.
about those origins. Like when I hear the word origins, it automatically brings me to like, damn, where's my family from? You know what I mean?
Mm, mm. Well, I think like for a lot of black and brown folks, we grow up oftentimes, being really frustrated about the way that we grew up and the things that we had or didn't have, and like the loopholes that we had to go through and the things that we saw our parents go through. And I know it's really easy for a lot of folks to not want to replicate that and want to get away from that. But I think it's really important that no matter where you're at in your journey, to honor where it is that you came from and honor those experiences along the way, because they really shape you into who you are. And you wouldn't be who you are and where you're at without all of them. It's kind of like the movie Everything Everywhere All at Once. I don't know if you saw it, but
It's a
yeah,
great
okay.
movie.
Amazing movie. I love how they show, how with every micro decision, there's going to be like a vastly different outcome, is essentially how they paint it. Some similar outcomes, but vastly different in a lot of ways. And so I like to think oftentimes when I'm like practicing gratitude, to remember that like although I may have been frustrated about the situation or depressed at this point in my life, like I am here for a reason, and all of those ups and downs are part of that. And so just to be grateful for myself, right, and for yourselves for like getting through that, and continuing to push on through your own journey, whatever that looks like.
Oof. Tell me about one of those moments where you thought about you were like, yo, I was really down, but now I'm really thankful that one of those things happened.
Yeah, so not directly related to professionalism here, but for me, I finished undergrad January 22 technically. I did an extra semester. And so for me, when I look back at undergrad, I kind of get frustrated at myself because I sacrificed so much through undergrad to study and to do summer classes and winter classes, because at the time I was pre-med. I thought I was going to be in med school, or I thought that was the goal. And I look back and I'm like, dang, Jorge, like you could have probably been so much further in your creative career or in your whatever career path I'm on now, had I not sacrificed those 4.5 years like in the books, right? But at the same time, looking back, I'm like, okay, well, all those experiences and me feeling really low and depressed my first year was actually the catalyst to where I'm at now. And
And
so honoring that.
why were
Go
you so
ahead.
depressed in that first year too?
Yeah, yeah. So in my first year, it was definitely just the fact that I had just graduated. My parents were going through their thing. I was going through a lot of different things personally in my last relationship. And I was a first gen Latino student on my college campus. I went to Rutgers. So Rutgers has over like, I think, almost 20K undergrads and grads. I think actually it's more than 30K. It's a huge, huge campus. So it was really easy to feel alone and feel really lost. So like that was one of the biggest reasons why I felt, as low as I did and experienced depression, quite frankly. So yeah.
That's something that I think a lot of people relate to. But it's fascinating to me that like you just graduated college. Like you carry yourself as such a and just like a mature older person. I mean,
Mm.
even the words they use like depression, like I didn't know what that was at your age. How did you like how did you even know to identify the fact that you were going through some of these feelings at that age?
First, thank you. And I'd say that, again, when people say that to me, I think it's important for me to check myself and realize like it's because of all these different experiences that have pushed me to learn, not the greatest experiences. And so again, to my earlier point, on one hand, it's easy to be like, dang, well, I wish I didn't have those experiences. And I wish that I didn't have to get pushed to that limit to then learn about all these things and get comfortable with this language. But, I am grateful for everything that made me who I am and that led me here. And I'd say for me, that's what it was. It was almost out of desperation, like not having a choice but to learn and but to familiarize myself with mental health. And it wasn't just me wanting to learn about it and me having to learn about it. It was also me recognizing that I wanted to make sure like no one else like us had that experience. And so in order for me to do that, I had to also understand it and know how to talk about it. And this was like 5 years ago at this point. So it's been a while, but those were the two things that really pushed me to, learn more about the language, become more comfortable with it, have these conversations with folks, even if it was a little bit odd in the beginning. Yeah, it wasn't
Even
easy. It was strange for sure.
even as you were like doing this studying, if you will, like
Hmm.
outside of the courses that you were learning about,
Right.
you were going through these experiences. Like, did you share any of these insights with people? Did you share any of these feelings? Did anyone else know sort of like what you were going through?
Definitely not. Looking back, there were a few folks who I think I tried to be vulnerable with, but even then, what being vulnerable looked like was me saying I was stressed, right? I was
Mm,
sad, I'm exhausted, any word but depression. And it's interesting because I compare that moment 5 years ago when I was an undergrad to when I started my co-op and when I started my internship at Merck, where looking back, I ended in February, but looking back, I especially from I'd say October 21 to December or to February 22 was also experiencing depression. And despite having taken the time to learn a lot more about it since those 5 years ago, fast forward, I was back in this place where I didn't realize I was depressed during those months until I looked back and I was like, oh, wait, I was kind of feeling not the greatest. And so I bring those two examples up in contrast just because I think that no matter where you're at in life,
mhm.
checking in with yourself and recognizing what it is you're actually experiencing takes work. And it takes, again, even for the experts out there, like it takes time to sometimes process, oh damn, I'm not okay, like I'm not feeling great. But I definitely try to have those conversations then. And fast forward, because I didn't catch on to what I was experiencing most recently, I didn't have those conversations, but I did after, feel way more comfortable in talking about it with like my partner, with my friends on podcasts, just bringing up, yeah, I was depressed, a couple of months ago. And it don't have the same shame around that as I would have had some time back.
Yeah, I often think about these experiences, right? Like there you are, even depressed, going through a tough time. And I think when we don't share it with people, or if we don't share it and then get that confirmation that like, oh, I'm also going through this, obviously
Mm-hmm.
like we feel alone, right? But when we feel alone, I think we often feel like we're the problem,
Mm,
you
yes.
know? But when
Yes.
we hear someone else is going through things, you're like, oh, maybe there's like a bigger situation here, whether it's like capitalism, professionalism, all the isms, you know what I
Oh
mean?
yeah. Mm-hmm.
And like maybe it's just like school's really difficult. Like, but that like realization that you're not alone almost like humanizes the experience that you're going through, right? But
Mm-hmm.
then it's also really difficult because in your experience, like you start sharing some of these things, but the language that you hear doesn't quite qualify and symbolize and like capture exactly what you're feeling. But it's
Mm-hmm.
fascinating.
Yeah.
Like, I wonder if the people that were saying they were stressed and overwhelmed and all these things, they didn't even have the right language to even communicate like how they were feeling.
No, exactly. And honestly, I've seen that with a lot of my friends. Like, since they graduated in May 21, they all went into their first corporate jobs or whatever space the industry they're going into. And, I actually sat down with one of them and they recently, were telling me about how in those earlier months, they're like, yeah, man, I was definitely depressed when I started this job just because they felt so alone, right? They were like either the only person of color on the team or just didn't really feel like they had a space to talk about, what they were like being challenged by in the space. And it's like I look at them and I'm like, wow, it's interesting that they are able to talk about this now because and with me of course because I wonder who else they had the chance to share this with,
Yeah.
not just while they were going through it but even after the fact. Like I feel like a lot of my friends think of Jorge as like, oh, I can talk about this with Jorge, but I wish that we were in a world where like it wasn't just Jorge they could talk about it with, right?
Mm,
It was like their coworker. But you're right, it's not the reality. And in fact, a lot of folks don't recognize that what they're going through to begin with. They're just like, oh my God, I'm so stressed, I'm overwhelmed. Like I just can't get through these deliverables or whatever it is that I'm working on. And it's just like, well, maybe you're burnt out. Maybe you're going through something else. But it's just like the culture, like you said, because of all the isms, the
yep.
culture is just like, keep going, keep going, keep going, especially in corporate. So,
Yeah. And before we get into corporate, I think it's also fascinating just like the expectations that our family has for us and the feedback that they give us, I think is very influential on how like we carry ourselves. So in that moment, you're going through certain situations, you did share that you started sharing and being vulnerable to certain people. Like I'm wondering,
mhm.
was your family one of them? And if so, like how were you received?
Yeah. So, I'd say most recently, No, they weren't, and that was because, again, I didn't realize until after. Like, I mentioned it to my mom, but it's not really something that we dive into. But rewind even further, especially, again, 5 years ago, 2017, um, I was really, 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 like, closed off, and it just was not something that I would ever really talk about because, and I've said this so many times, like whenever I have the chance to talk about this, but growing up in my household, my mom was always like, what's said in the house stays in the house. Like, you don't journal, because if someone finds that journal, you don't know what they'll do with it. Don't talk about what's going on in your head, because people can use it against you. And so that was what I like, the narrative I got from my mom. From my dad, he would cry when he saw a sad movie. He wasn't one of those guys who didn't cry, but crying is not the only shouldn't be the only indication of men being able to display emotion. It should be having these conversations. That obviously wasn't something I was exposed to, and so when I was going through what I was, my parents were definitely not the first people that I thought about. And again, it's because part of the reason is I didn't know what I was going through, but then even when I did, they weren't the first people. I was like, oh, I need to call my mom and tell her, mommy, I'm depressed. Like, my therapist just
Mm,
told me I have anxiety. It was more so like, okay, let me talk with my, then partner, who I met months after, and let me talk with, maybe this person who I just went on this trip with. We were able to cultivate some like closer conversation. We relate in some way, and so I feel like that ability to relate, whether that's through something like culture, academic path, career path, what have you, was what allowed me to, really nourish friendships and eventually have those conversations with folks.
yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. Even like all the advice that our family gives us is I think a lot like based in fear.
Mm,
But I mean, my mom used to tell me like, because working in tech or whatever company you work at, like there's a lot of social gatherings, right? So the first
yeah.
time I told my mom that I went to like a happy hour with coworkers, she was like, "Don't do that ever again." They're like she thought they were there to like set me up and sabotage me, like get me drunk and then
Hmm.
record a video of me and then like get me fired. Like she
Yeah.
swore the company was just like trying to like on this secret plan to get me fired. I was like, Mom, no, it doesn't work like that. But I guess we got to realize like, yo, like our family have been through their own set of trauma and things, and like maybe the advice that they give us is like based on their fears and things that they experience. But
Hmm.
on top of that advice, like I'm curious too, because there's this idea of you going to college and then like starting work. What sort of ideas or expectations did your family have for you as went into your like your academic career? Like, is that one of the reasons you went into pre-med, for example?
Looking back, it was definitely a subconscious yes. Like, on the surface, I was like, no, no, no. I took a lot of time to reflect. And this is in the context of pursuing the pre-med path to ultimately get to med school. I was like,
Sure.
no, it's not because of anything my parents said, because I really just want to serve people, help people, specifically in the psychiatric field at one point. But when I think deep down, definitely. Like, I remember my mom saying that, when she was at church and I was in her belly, a man stopped by her and said, he's going to travel the world and heal people. Right. And my mom said that to me from like middle high school.
Oh,
And so that's always been in the
wow.
back of my head, right? Of like, oh, someone already told my mom that I'm gonna like be healing people. It's actually interesting just because, like, I think those are the subconscious seeds that are planted in us that did influence my decision to go into what I perceived as a more noble profession, right? This idea of the white coat and, being seen as a doctor. I knew it wasn't the money, the goal wasn't money for that. Do not become a doctor if you're trying to make money. But I knew that it was like, wow, like I would be there. I made it. I would have made it if I can get there. And taking a step back, what I was going to say when I said it was interesting was that, that church example, I think in hindsight, I look at it, I kind of laugh about it. But it's interesting because recently, when I told my mom I wasn't going to, be pursuing med school, um, she said, she's like, at the end of the day, you're still doing what I always knew you were going to do. You may not be like physically traveling to heal people, but you're helping people heal around the world. And I was like, oh, that hit. I was like,
Wow.
dang, that I appreciated that. So I guess to close this thought, it's my mom has never, explicitly placed any expectation on me, and that's the one thing I'm very grateful. Neither has my dad. They've always been like, and this is something I definitely I don't take for granted. They definitely always encouraged me to just do what makes me happy. As long as I'm, working towards it and working hard towards it, just do what makes me happy. And that's gone a long way too as well.
Yo, I got chills when you said that your mom said that. Like,
So
You're
did I.
still healing people. Wow.
Mhm.
So, I mean, there you are, like still in your academics, and then you did experience some sort of you did have corporate experience in the form of like co-ops and internships. Even when you started interviewing for some of those, like what was sort of the thought process in going into it? Because there you
Mhm.
are too in like a school, which like most schools are mostly white, but this time like money's on the line, your potential career's on the line. Did you think
Mhm.
about like, do I need to change part of myself to be accepted? Like how did you think about when you first started interviewing?
Abso-freaking-lutely, I think that I had to change myself. I definitely did. So when I started to apply to internships and co-ops, it was, as most of us, it was a place of, yes, how can I get a variation of experience in the healthcare industry at the time was my thought process. So that's why I chose to apply to pharma. But it was also, where's the money at? Because your boy's broke and I need to make money and I'm paying my mom's bills over here. So how can I do this? So that
Yeah.
was kind of my thought process there. And so when I was applying, and then I saw, obviously who I was being interviewed by, especially, which is two white men. I remember like I had just gotten my second nose stud piercing. So I have, for those of you listening in, I have a stud on my right nostril, a hoop on my left, and then a septum. But at the time, I only had my left and right. And so I remember I was like, oh my gosh, well, I can't take out the left one. It's still healing. And at one point I was considering, I was like, okay, well, I should maybe take it out. I might just have to re-pierce it. And I actually did do that. What am I saying? I did do that. So it was still healing. And I was like, no, I need to take it out. Like, I can't risk. So I took out my left one, which was still healing. I took out my left one, which was okay. And it actually got to the point where I also put on an outfit that literally was something I would never wear in public. Like it was this this ugly button up that I just, it was one of my dad's old shirts that I usually wear open. And then I put like a sweater over that. I'm like, first of all, I'm a big guy. That's not a comfortable fit for me. But it was virtual, so I was like, I gotta do this. So I looked so preppy. I took out my piercings. The curls were something I couldn't. Oh, I actually also put my curls in a bun so that it wasn't visible. So I'm explaining all this because I definitely had that period where I was like, okay, in order to get a job at a place like this, I have to look not how I was presenting at that moment. And after, I actually ended up having to go back to the piercer to get my left nostril re-pierced anyway, put the hoop back in. So after that, I was like, that's not worth it. Like, why did I do all of that? And I had my friends and my girlfriend who, were like, who checked me a little, and I was like, yeah, like I wouldn't want to work at a place that for looking the way I'm looking right now. That was definitely an experience I had going into corporate, especially because it was such a new world for me. It wasn't a world that I had prepped for. It's not like
Mhm.
I was already in those spaces. So I think that's why the pressure was especially high, especially since, again, like it was a money making role that, like you said, I really did want because it would have helped me a lot. And it did, but yeah.
That is fascinating. I'm still stuck on you with the bun. I've never seen you in a bun.
It's been a while. It's been a while. Last summer I used to was like the last time I would really wear it. But then I started cutting my curls at a length that I couldn't do it. But yeah, when my hair was full length last summer, which was also when I hadn't been interviewing, I kind of would alternate. But yeah, I only would ever do it. Like the main time I would make sure to do it was definitely during interviews. Just also because like in order for my curls to look nice, I have to like wet them, and sometimes my
Yeah.
hair would still be wet before an interview. So it was just easier to like flick it up. But yeah.
What did it feel like when people that you were close to start calling you out?
So I mean, first of all, when I say calling me out, it was like the most friendly thing. Like I was just
No,
saying,
yeah,
like
yeah.
it was just like I told my friends, and they were like, "Ah, like yeah, you probably don't need to do all that." Like maybe one or two of them said that, but my girlfriend was the one who was more so like "Do you want to work at a place that doesn't hire you for looking the way you look?" And I was like, "You're right." Noted. I had no confliction against that. I internally, that's also my core value. That's how I think and feel. But when the pressure came on, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, like, I can't risk not getting this well-paying job."
Mhm.
I was like, whoop, and I just did things that now I definitely wouldn't do. So yeah.
Well, it's interesting too because while you ended up getting an internship and then you ended up starting to, this was at a time where I think it was like a hybrid. So you were like in the office, virtual as well. But it was
Mm,
also a time where like if people were in the office, everyone was masking up.
mhm, mhm.
So no one really saw, you couldn't really even see your nose, right? Like what were you doing at that point?
So it was actually when masking was just lifted.
Oh,
Yeah. So at least in the office I was in, and so I would actually keep my mask on um, even when everyone else in the room had their masks off. Not because I was being extra careful. Everyone there was tested, vaccinated, but I would do it because that's when I actually did have my septum. So
Mm,
that was like, wait, I, being in a corporate setting with all these white, mostly actually white European, because it was like the
mm,
global exec office, like, so the culture is very different already there as well. And they were all at least like 45 years old. Like no one was younger than that. No one was definitely younger than 30. I was like, okay, I definitely need to keep my mask on because this would be a lot. This would be a whole thing. And I just didn't want, my work or my presence to be perceived as other, as, a lot of us here listening can relate to.
yeah. I mean,
Hmm.
even you referencing it as a mask, it's kind of like, wait, are you talking about the literal one or the figurative one?
Hmm. Hmm.
And
The
that's
literal, yeah.
that's that's deep, man. It's interesting too, because it's at the same time like you were doing this internship, I believe, is when you started making content as well.
Hmm.
And really started like doubling down, not only just making it, but like a lot of your content started going viral.
Hmm.
Like, what was that duality of just like you have this corporate job where you're like literally wearing a mask to like hide, your piercings, etc. Yet you're on TikTok going viral, showing off the curls, talking about some like deep, vulnerable things that at one point you didn't even want to share with the people closest to you.
Hmm. So I'll start with, because we just left off on the whole corporate, my experience in corporate piece. I'd say that the first thing that comes to mind is, like you said, there was such a strong duality and like contrast, because on TikTok I'd get hella compliments on my curls, on my piercings, so I,
Interesting.
I felt good being myself. Like I was just be like, I just talked to the camera about what I learned in therapy 2 weeks ago, and I was excited and I was myself, and that was really cool and very validating. Whereas again in the office it was just not like that. And I remember I would like record TikToks like before I'd go into the office too. And it was like such a different like switch, right? That I turn on and off. And so it was challenging, I'd say, aside from just like feeling and looking different in the spaces. I think the most challenging part was I started to recognize that my passion was not at all what I was doing in that office. Or when I was working from home, right? Like I was recording my TikToks and I would feel such excitement and joy and fulfillment and such a strong sense of community. And then I go to the
Mm,
office and it was just like crickets and I was just by myself. And honestly, I think that duality was what really contributed to the pivot that I've made with my career as well. It made me
mm,
realize that, okay, maybe pursuing medicine isn't what I want to do as of right now. At the time I was thinking, but I definitely don't want to be in an office like this. And then I realized I wanted to do something where I could engage in my creativity, where I could just be myself. And there was a lot of, I think, reflections that came out of that, but those are some of them that, come to mind now.
but I'm curious at work though, right? And
Hmm.
and we'll get deeper into the content at work. Like you were going through this experience where, you were masking up on purpose to like hide certain things. At some point, did you take that off though?
I would, yes, I would. However, I would flip up my septum. So when I would take off my mask, I was like, maybe three would be too much for them.
Mm,
So maybe the two would look okay. So for those of you who don't know, like the septum, when it's like the horseshoe looking piercing with the two like balls at the end, you can just flip it up and you can't even tell like you have a septum piercing. A lot of people do that to hide it from their parents. It's kind of funny. But I was doing that to hide it from my coworkers and my boss. And so, of course I was more self-conscious, and it was definitely something on my mind. Like I would be very like straight and just stern because I wouldn't want to like look around, and if I look at someone they're going to see both, but if I'm just looking straight or down on my laptop they'll see like the one. So that was definitely something on my mind and something that I did do, but it was with that emotional, I guess, the unnecessary emotional inner turmoil that I was experiencing at the time.
yeah. Did anyone say anything though, as far as like probably shouldn't wear that here? You probably shouldn't do this and that here.
No, not at all. Not at all. It was just, again, being in that space where everyone was so much older than me,
Hmm, hmm.
and everyone was such part of different cultures, cultures that I didn't understand. Again, European
Yeah.
backgrounds. It was just like, it felt like an unspoken rule. Everyone literally came in, their suits and their, different colored slacks on occasion. But that was the most color I saw in that space, aside from me. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Most of us like create a story or an idea in our head around what will be accepted or not. And
definitely.
it's often not a result of people telling us that we shouldn't do it. It's just like us walking into an environment and then just looking around and seeing what people are doing. And then we're
Hmm.
like, all right, well, like no one has curly hair here. I'm curly hair is not safe. Like that's the signals that we get back, right? But what if
100%.
you walk into that same environment and a few people have curly hair? The signal is probably like, oh shit, maybe it's safe to wear curly hair here. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? But like
100%. Yeah.
it's scary to be like that first person, let's call it, or like
Hmm.
that only person, right? Because then that's when people start being almost like surprised or like, oh, this person's the only one here with that like piercing, the hair, the whatever it is. But it's also fascinating too, like you, this idea of like you starting to create content and like of course people are gonna resonate with like what you're talking about, but they're also just like complimenting you on things that you didn't even expect. You were like, oh, I you like my hair? Like, oh, I didn't even know that's what people were gonna talk about. It
No,
it it,
exactly.
it makes me think about, oh man, I forget this guest's name, but she put up a video of her talking about her quitting her
Mm,
job, or like I think she got like fired recently or something like that. And in the video she has like a tank top on, but her whole sleeve is showing. And
mm,
then literally her intention was to like raise awareness for like people quitting and job situations, but like literally every single comment was talking about her sleeve. And she was like,
of course.
damn, really are people like gravitating towards the sleeve thing? Maybe I should like always wear a tank top or something like that. But like
Hmm.
for the first time ever, although she was disappointed she didn't get the comment she wanted, she did feel seen because she's been hiding that sleeve for so long.
Mm.
So it was really interesting, like her starting to just like create a community of people that like just accepted her. Like it was one of the first times where she felt accepted herself.
Oh, definitely. And it's also sad because, like, I also have friends who literally are like, oh, I'll get a tattoo when I get to this point in my career. Like, you're
Mm,
postponing things that you're looking forward to because of your 9 to 5, which is supposed to supplement the things you really want to do and the experiences you want to have, and the things you want to buy yourself and do to your body. It shouldn't be a timeline for when you can and can't do things. And so
yeah.
to that example that you brought up, it's like for the folks who do have their, who are expressing themselves however they are, it's like I get that. I get that it's like it's scary to show that part of yourself, but it's so important. And that's why I love everything you're doing with redefining professionalism because and I said this to you when we first connected, I think it was like last October. Um like having these conversations the same way we talk about breaking cycles because and these are very much interconnected are so important because once you start having those conversations and you start seeing folks who look like us who are showing up like their authentic selves with
Mhm.
whatever jewelry, hair color, whatever that is, whatever style, like you realize to your earlier point that it is okay and that there
Mhm.
are so many more of us out there. And it's just like, if we just all lean into it, we won't feel this way. But it's obviously, again, working through a lot of those subconscious and internalized feelings and our own implicit biases towards ourselves.
Yeah, 100%. But it's got to be a little scary. It's got to be a little
Very.
nerve-wracking
Mhm.
and anxiety-inducing, this idea of like you just graduating college, you were on this path of landing a internship that people would probably kill for,
Mm,
and you said, you know what, this isn't fun. It's not necessarily like filling my cup. I'm gonna focus on this other thing, right? But
mm,
but you're like putting so many traditional potential career paths aside to like
mm.
create your own. Like, tell me a little bit about the emotions that are going through and some of the thoughts that come by. Because I just quit my job, and the story I tell myself is like, "Fuck, what if I want to go back to corporate? Like, are they gonna want me?" You
Mm.
know?
Yeah, yeah. No, I feel that. Okay, so I'd say first with when I was realizing that I didn't want to pursue medicine at that point, it was so scary for me. I just didn't want to pursue it. Period. That's why I
Mhm.
keep saying at that point because that's genuinely how I thought about it. I was like, oh, for now, maybe in 5 years, 3 years, I'll go back. But it was just so hard to let go of that. Not only because of the time and energy I put into it, but also just because it was truly deep down, I think, what I thought I really wanted to do. But as with time in life, when you have those new experiences, you realize, oh, wait, I'm good at this, or I really enjoy this too. And that's kind of where the conflict came out of last summer when I was letting go of medicine, figuring out what my next job or research role was going to look like, and then creating came up. And I'd say, like, since then, it has been scary. I felt I've dealt with a lot of inner conflict and false leads. Basically, to explain that, it's like I have had periods of time where I'm like, oh, maybe I do want to go into tech, because I'll literally think about folks like you. And I'll be like, okay, Pavel was, able to, after working, at TikTok and Facebook, now he's able to just do his own thing because he was able to save up and invest. Blah, blah, blah. And then I'm like, wait, but the reason why he did that was because he didn't feel seen in the space. He was over that space. So it's like, do I want to go down that road? And I was like, you know what? Maybe I should look at other paths. So it's like seeing folks like you, like me, kind of share this has really helped my own inner conflict and the narrative I've been telling myself about what I should and shouldn't be doing next. And so I think that's been really exciting. And then when I look at the other side of what a lot of folks like you and I are doing now, it's like, oh well, this person quit. They recognize their worth, and it's not going to be easy, and it maybe hasn't been easy, but they're thriving. Like they're getting like press on them. Their company is growing. Their podcast is hitting. Like, and for me, that it makes me realize that okay, like it's going to be challenging, and this is this comes with privilege to say, but it's something that I want to figure out. When I say it's something, I mean understanding how I can be more creative and create my own path forward is something that it's worth figuring out. And so that I think is what's helped me, but it's also been, like you said, really scary because I've gone through a lot of those, especially traditional post-grad thoughts where you're like, what's going to happen? Like, what do I want to do with my life? What's the most strategic first move? What if I don't, do something that's related to my degree? Will I not be able to turn back? Will I have to get a master's at some point to pivot? So that's been a lot of the things that have played out. But again, I think just looking around and leaning, and it might sound cliche to some, but for me personally, like leaning on community, not by explicitly going to them and talking to them about this, but by just kind of seeing what they've been creating for themselves and what life they're trying to lead has really helped me there.
Yeah, it's interesting even you referencing like me or just other people you've spoken to. You're like, oh shit, maybe I should go into tech. Because I mean, there's clout in saying you work at like whatever company. There's
Mhm.
like, oh my God, Abuela could finally talk about me at church about a company that like she knows about. You know what I mean?
Mhm, mhm,
I mean, it's just easy in a conversation. Like I remember even going on dates. I used to be excited to tell people that I worked at Facebook. I'll be honest,
mhm,
right now, I'm not excited to tell people that I run my own business. I'm insecure as
mhm.
fuck about it.
It
My
takes so much
friend,
more explaining too sometimes.
yeah, I mean, my friend who literally quit his job and now he's streaming on Twitch playing video games, he's making more money than he was at his other job, but there's insecurity in being like, yeah, I play video games for a living. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Oh
yeah,
my God, like
definitely.
there's so much attachment and like value that we place on titles, traditional titles,
Mhm.
and letting go of that and being like, yes, I work for myself and I'm a full-time, writer, producer, content creator, whatever title you want to throw on it. That's tough.
Oh, it's been tough. I very much agree with that. Like when people have been asking me,
And
what
you're
am
the
I
mental and you're
doing?
the mental health person. You're the one that talks about this stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. And that's why it's like for me, it's always interesting because when people are like, "Oh, what are you doing?" I'm like, I'm creating, but like I'm not your traditional influencer. I talk about mental health and things. Like I'm like, what's
And
my elevator
things.
pitch now? Yeah, I'm
And
like,
things.
what do I say? Or like, I want to go into social impact, and they're like, what's that? I'm like, building campaigns. Oh, like how? Like what campaign? I'm like, it's like I'm still learning how to develop that new language, for sure. And I'd say that also comes with some anxiety, right? Like
Mhm.
owning the fact that you've made a pivot is one thing because I think no matter how excited we are about it, there's always those fears, those like subconscious fears and those anxieties that we definitely experience. And so when someone I think asks us, "Oh, what are you doing?" without us even realizing it, it brings those up, right? We might have an elevator pitch, but it's also like it brings up those same fears that we've been grappling with, or those, the things that have been making us nervous about our journeys.
Mhm.
Um, and it's definitely a process and it's a mindset shift that takes time, and I'm very much with you figuring that out with like, what do I call this path? And I'm gradually understanding whatever the space is that I'm in, and getting the language for it. But I feel like when I talk to my friends who are more traditional paths, and they're like, yeah, I work at so and so doing consulting, I work with clients, and this is what my day-to-day looks like, and they're like, oh, what does your day-to-day look like? I'm like, well, it should be exciting, right? To be like,
Mhm.
I create my own schedule. I have meetings if I
Yeah.
want. I record podcast interviews if I want.
Hmm.
But then it's also like it's just nerve wracking. Like I
Yeah.
can't really put the words there, but yeah.
No, I need my own elevator pitch. I remember pitching it. Why am I saying pitching it? I remember talking to somebody about like what I do, and I was
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
damn, that's not salesy enough. Like
Mm,
I
mm,
remember looking back and being like, I need more industry buzzwords to make this sound more exciting. Like
mm-hmm,
I wasn't even trying to like explain it. I was more so trying to sell it to people where like they weren't even
mm.
customers. I just wanted them to buy into the vision or the idea that I had a cool life. You know what I mean?
You know, now that you say that, without you realizing, I'm like, I have done a similar thing. I'm like, I've literally sat down and I looked at my bio, and I'll have straightforward bio,
Yeah.
but I'm like,
Yeah.
how can I make it sound, more profound? Oh, Jorge provokes thought.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'm like, but I just talk about my mental health. I talk about what I learned in therapy.
Yeah.
And I'm learning to kind of like, tailor that to be more personable rather than like so buzzy, but definitely. And it's also being a solo entrepreneur, whatever you want to call us, creator. It's also like it's interesting because we do need to develop that language, right? When we're talking to potential sponsors and all that. But it's also important to realize that we don't need to carry that as like a paper in our pockets and tell everyone that story. I should be able to say I'm a mental health advocate. I create content as an extension of that. And I think I want to go into social impact without having to be like, I create inspiring content that provokes thought and really, yeah, I mean, it does do that maybe, but we don't need all that sometimes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I
And it just
feel
makes
you,
us feel
man.
better. It just makes us feel better. That's why we do all that as well sometimes when it comes to like our friends and social circles.
It does. Because
Hmm.
what used to make me feel better was that corporate title. Now I'm
Mm,
finding the substitute with adjectives around
hmm,
like
hmm.
trying to talk about my career. It's interesting that even like talking about your career, like here you are sort of like not beholden to like traditional corporate standards of what like professionalism looks like, on what appearance looks like. But here you are building a personal brand for yourself, and now you're getting invited to do a bunch of dope shit. I
Mm,
mean,
hmm, hmm.
you were at the White House.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
what was going through your mind when you were like, how am I gonna look? Like, did you think back to
Mm.
like that first interview, or were you more comfortable in just like how you are now? You were like, how is my picture gonna look next to President Biden?
Yeah, yeah. Honestly, I'd say that since December 21, I have felt way more confident in showing up how I look and showing up how I want to look. And again, that's been through going through those experiences where I struggled in even recognizing the changes I was doing to look like I fit in. But I think again, seeing your content and seeing this conversation has really helped. And so fast forward to this past May when I did speak at the White House, I did not have nearly the same anxiety or fear. And I can honestly own that. So, like, shout out to you and everyone who's having these conversations because it's truly helped me and made me feel like I can be myself. And also, what helped was that a lot of the other folks there, because there was 30 of us, and especially the other men, they too showed up like their authentic selves. Like my one friend, he had his whole fro going. He's from South Bronx, so he was rocking his like 80s fashion look with like his fro. My other friend, he had his curls out with his beard. And apparently I had found out that it was one of his first times like wearing his curls out on a stage. And so I
Wow.
think what made that a big deal for me was like, or what made it easier for me, sorry, was that I was able to look around the room and be like, no, we're gonna sit on this stage in the White House and own this. Like, we're gonna show up as we are. And that was without even saying words to each other. But I think for me, and I'd say that other folks definitely resonated in their own way, it was again that sense of community, right? Like we weren't alone. So it's like to our earlier point where we were like, oh, when you don't see it, it's like a red flag and that's like a subconscious thing. Well, when you do see it, it's also a sense of pride,
Hmm.
and like it was exciting for me. And I was like, no, I'm gonna go on stage with my double piercings. I didn't have my septum at the time because I got bored of it, but I was like, I'm gonna go on stage with my double piercings and my curls, and I did. And I look back at that video and I'm like, wow, I look good on that stage. I look great. I added some sazon on that in that White House. That's very needed. So it was a really nice, I think, liberating moment for me for sure.
Yes. And it almost normalizes whatever we want,
Hmm.
right? Because when
Hmm.
you're not alone on that stage, it's not necessarily a red flag, right? Like
Hmm.
you don't stand out. If anything, all of y'all blend in together. I love
Hmm.
that. And to close, man, I love where you are sort of like in this journey, but it's not over. Obviously, like we're all continuing to work on ourselves. What inspires you or makes you feel empowered to continue being your most authentic self?
It's funny because I was gonna answer that without even you asking the question. I would say when I'm on stages now, I think about all of the folks younger than me and all of the like younger Jorge's, past Jorge's, who needed to see me on stage. Not just, and when I say this, I don't mean just because of the conversations I'm having. That is huge. That's what I always own. But now I'm realizing it's so much more than that. It's also doing it, showing up authentically is so critical for me because it's also in my appearance. It's also just like in my full presence, and what that means to me is like it's not just for me but it's for my community. It's for specifically the younger community behind me who needs to see role models like us having these conversations. And think about it, it's a domino effect. Like the same way that seeing you having these conversations when I was still in that internship really helped me, and now it's like a trickle down. Now I'm showing up my full self, and the people younger than me are going to see me on that stage or on stages and be like, wow, okay, you know, they're not in, their first thought may not be like, oh, he has curls and piercings. They may just see themselves and that subconscious internalized moment is all they need to hopefully show up as themselves as well, with time of course, and that support. So yeah, I do it for myself, my community, and I think it's important to continue to lean into that no matter what the opportunity is.